That royal order was signed right after midnight, inside Buckingham Palace, completely quiet, absolutely cold. Zero ceremony. By sunrise, panicked senior aides were furiously rewriting the massive Easter procession list, and one huge name vanished completely from royal tradition: Queen Camilla. Desperate courtiers tried hiding the intense panic behind palace walls, but wild whispers spread lightning fast through London's elite. Why on earth would King Charles suddenly erase his own Queen Consort from the monarchy's absolute most symbolic public appearance? And seriously, why right now, when the fragile crown cannot survive another break? Stick with me here. Before you and I dive into this insane royal drama, hit subscribe so we can watch every crazy update together. The crazy part that made this whole scandal incredibly explosive, how ridiculously fast everything happened. Based on massive leaks from palace insiders, that shocking directive was finalized during a top secret late night meeting with only a tiny handful of senior royal officials present. Zero public announcements followed, absolutely no explanation was given. Yet, right before dawn, ceremonial staff received updated Easter instructions. These changes were so incredibly drastic, terrified aides actually believed a massive internal emergency had struck the monarchy itself. Entire seating arrangements changed. Strict procession protocols got rewritten. Royal security coordination teams were quickly ordered to rewrite arrival sequences, and somehow, buried right in the middle of those frantic adjustments, Queen Camilla's highly central ceremonial role just quietly vanished completely overnight. For several weeks, whispers claimed that heavy tensions inside royal households were getting nearly impossible to contain. Elite palace circles allegedly described a brutal atmosphere of pure exhaustion, heavy mistrust, and silent power struggles surrounding the king's serious health battles. Fresh interpretations of these private palace disputes prove the heavy disagreements were not just personal anymore. They became entirely institutional. Shocked insiders even claimed King Charles started heavily distancing himself emotionally during crucial ceremonial planning meetings, especially whenever difficult questions emerged about exactly how the monarchy should present itself during this insanely fragile period for the crown. And while panicked aides worked desperately to maintain public stability, observant royal correspondents reportedly caught very subtle signs that something huge had shifted behind locked palace doors long before Easter preparations officially started. Now pay very close attention here, because the reaction from the king's inner circle absolutely chilling. Deep sources familiar with palace operations claimed elite senior aides looked visibly shaken right after receiving those revised instructions. One trusted insider reportedly described the dark atmosphere as cold and final, while another terrified source suggested these massive changes carried the heavy weight of a decision secretly building for months. But even more revealing were the wild whispers surrounding Princess Anne. Even though no official role was publicly acknowledged, you feel that, right? Royal insiders increasingly pointed toward the Princess Royal as the true power behind the scenes. Princess Anne was always viewed as one of the royal family's absolute fiercest institutional protectors, someone valuing absolute duty, strict hierarchy, and rock solid stability over personal comfort. Wild reports now suggest she actually privately pushed King Charles to take a much harder line, strictly to shield the monarchy from further internal chaos, especially at a critical moment when public confidence mattered more than literally anything. Meanwhile, outside palace walls, the public initially noticed only tiny little irregularities. Easter planning details felt incredibly strangely restrained. Major ceremonial expectations appeared suddenly altered without explanation. Royal watchers began quietly comparing these updated schedules with previous years, desperately searching for clues. Then, boom! Those whispers exploded into something way larger. Why had the secretive palace refused clarification? Why did royal insiders keep describing the huge decision as institutional, never emotional? And why were so many powerful senior figures suddenly refusing to speak on record about Queen Camilla's role in the Easter arrangements? Those loud questions only deepened the terrible sense that something infinitely more serious was violently unfolding right behind that carefully controlled image of fake royal unity. So, what do you and I take from this? That midnight order was just the tip of a massive, terrifying crisis building secretly inside. Stick with me. Long before the Easter procession changed, something inside the actual monarchy had already begun to fiercely fracture. Hidden behind all those polished smiles and carefully staged public appearances, senior royals were deeply divided over loyalty, legacy, and the ultimate future image of the crown itself. And right at the center of those bitter private disagreements stood Camilla. Once protected, now increasingly isolated, the first major signs, according to palace whispers, actually started during the king's ongoing health struggles. That's when every public appearance, every ceremonial detail, and every household decision suddenly began carrying massive meaning. Charles was no longer just a husband or a monarch. He was a man caught between private devotion and public duty. He became the extremely fragile center of an institution under huge pressure all around him. Different royal factions reportedly started heavily arguing over what exact kind of monarchy should be shown to the world. Some believed pure compassion and personal loyalty should entirely guide the coming months, but others believed the crown had absolutely zero room for emotional hesitation, especially when sudden uncertainty around the king's strength had already made the entire palace look incredibly vulnerable. That's exactly where Princess. Now watch closely. Anne and William stepped forward with absolute quiet force. Insiders suggest they pushed hard for a sharper, stricter, and much more disciplined approach, placing the royal institution first, even when it created deep pain within the family to them. Easter wasn't just another ordinary royal calendar moment, it was a national symbol, a true test of order, a massive public reminder that the monarchy could still stand perfectly straight, even when its private foundations were literally trembling. And according to those familiar with the incredibly tense atmosphere inside royal planning circles, Camilla's rapidly growing ceremonial influence had really started to trouble the strict traditionalists, especially during a period when Charles's illness made every single decision feel massively magnified. Reports suggest some aides believed Camilla had begun pressing way too strongly directly into spaces once controlled by long serving palace officials. Others loudly defended her, saying she was only trying to support the king through one of the absolute hardest chapters of his entire reign. But the vicious divide was very real. On one side stood loyalists who saw Camilla as Charles's core emotional anchor. On the other side stood institutional guardians who heavily feared that too much dependence on her would actually weaken the overall image of the crown at precisely the wrong time. Behind closed doors, those intense arguments reportedly became sharper, colder, and harder to hide. Then came the Clarence House meetings, private, incredibly tense, and according to insiders, deliberately limited. Some major discussions reportedly moved forward without Camilla even present, a detail that sent absolute shockwaves through staff corridors. It heavily suggested that the palace was no longer just managing normal Easter arrangements, it was actively managing Camilla herself. Kate Middleton was said to support a much calmer, disciplined royal image, one deeply rooted in restraint, rather than sheer personal dominance. And as media insiders began sensing highly unusual secrecy around the Easter planning, the mood inside the palace hardened into something absolutely unmistakable. You saw this coming, right? That quiet disagreement over optics became a vicious battle for power, influence, and pure survival, Camilla. once totally shielded by Charles's loyalty, now appeared to be facing a completely different force entirely, the cold, unforgiving machinery of the crown. But the real turning point came right after one private confrontation that insiders now firmly believe changed absolutely everything overnight. According to Dark Palace whispers, the argument was sharp, intensely emotional, and completely impossible to contain. Raised voices reportedly echoed loudly through the private royal residence just days before those Easter procession revisions began. By the end of that explosive meeting, aides were said to be leaving rooms visibly shaken, and King Charles himself appeared completely emotionally exhausted. What made this alleged confrontation so dangerous was not only the raw emotion behind it. Trust me, you and I need to hear what they discussed. Let's dive into this massive Easter protocol drama. A detail that might look like a tiny thing to the public, but carried absolutely massive symbolic weight inside the royal family. Because Easter was never just some casual outing, it was a strict statement of power, a clear signal showing exactly who stood closest to King Charles, who actually represented the future, and who finally earned the right to stand in the most sacred spots of royal tradition. That is exactly why every single position, every rule, and every change was reportedly heavy with secret meaning. Camilla, according to palace insiders, fought back against these proposed changes with absolute quiet fury. Those close to the household claim she firmly believed her place beside Charles should never be questioned, especially while he was dealing with such intense private and public pressure. To her loyal supporters, this was pure devotion, but to her critics, total overreach. And as that intense meeting dragged late into the evening, the divide reportedly froze into something much colder.
Top senior
Aides allegedly warned them. The procession needed to scream stability, extreme discipline, and public trust, definitely not personal feelings, but Camilla's side, according to palace whispers, saw this shift as total humiliation disguised as protocol. Now watch closely, because Princess Anne's name just entered the chat like a hidden blade. Reports say she was not loud, not reckless, zero sentimentality. She was firm, honestly, unusually firm. Insiders claim Anne's stance was brutally simple. The royal family could not afford any public confusion, not during Charles's health battles, definitely not before a massive religious event, and not while the public trust was already cracking. If the crown looked weak or divided, every single newspaper, commentator, and greedy critic would smell blood. And once that weakness infected the royal bloodstream, it would become almost impossible to cure. King Charles, trapped completely between private love and public survival, was reportedly growing incredibly frustrated as the argument heated up. Sources claim he fully understood the emotional cost of slashing Camilla's ceremonial power, but he also recognized the massive danger of letting this internal family war spill right into the public eye. His exhaustion became completely impossible to ignore. Not just physical tiredness, but the soul crushing fatigue of a desperate king forced to choose between the one woman he defended for decades and the ancient institution he swore to protect. By the time this tense meeting wrapped up, royal staff were strictly ordered to stay completely silent, no leaks, no explanations, no drama. But you and I know silence usually screams louder than any statement could. Shortly after, royal security and scheduling teams received completely revised ceremonial instructions. Suddenly, the massive machinery of the palace began moving with terrifyingly chilling speed. King Charles, insiders whisper, no longer viewed this feud as just some petty family drama. He saw it as a direct threat to royal survival. But pulling her from the procession was not just punishment, it was actually part of a cold, calculated strategy already unfolding in the shadows. While pure confusion infected the royal households, one figure reportedly stayed dead calm, hyper focused, and completely unbothered by the exploding chaos. Princess Anne. Palace insiders are now whispering that the Princess Royal officially activated what terrified staff privately dubbed an Iron Protocol, basically. A silent institutional counterattack fully designed to protect the crown during one of its absolute weakest periods in modern history. To really grasp why Anne's alleged intervention hit with such brutal force, you must understand her exact role in the royal machine. She was not the loudest voice in any room. She honestly never needed to be. For decades, everyone just viewed her as the unbreakable working spine of the family. The single royal who actually understood that the crown survives not through messy emotion, but through pure discipline. So when this Easter dispute reportedly began destroying that image of perfect unity around King Charles, Anne's ruthless response was reportedly ice cold, brutally direct, and just unmistakably strategic. Palace Whispers actually claim she quietly stepped right into the absolute center of ceremonial coordination, not as a petty rival to Camilla, but as a fierce guardian of strict order. This legendary Iron Protocol reportedly had one single purpose: absolute stability above all else. Crazy. Right optics demanded control. The hierarchy had to be crystal clear. Let's dive into this real world palace drama. The monarchy still had to look completely firm and disciplined and perfectly capable, even while the king faced massive personal strain. Insiders claim this meant messy feelings, personal loyalties, and playing favorites were suddenly out. Easter was way too crucial now. This wasn't just a cozy family holiday anymore. It morphed into the ultimate test of royal survival. And that is exactly when the veteran aides who felt tossed aside lately suddenly stepped right back into absolute power. Old school loyalists grabbed the steering wheel again for key planning roles. Meanwhile, those seen as allies to Camilla got quietly shoved away from all critical decisions. Zero official announcements, nothing was openly admitted. But behind closed palace doors, the massive power shift was completely undeniable. Invites were reviewed, every movement got recalculated, public optics were locked down tight. With every silent little tweak, Camilla's inner circle basically lost all influence. And Prince William, royal insiders say, he started fully backing Princess Anne's hardcore approach. This was not cruelty, it was pure calculation. William saw exactly what Charles was up against. He also knew exactly what kind of mess he would inherit if things looked weak, fractured, or run by messy feelings. For him, this Easter walk became way more than. Now pay attention. This became a massive warning about the royal family's future. If they let the rules bend under pressure now, then the entire royal tradition would crumble. And honestly, neither William nor Anne were going to let that happen. Through these intense meetings, Queen Elizabeth II's ghost basically directed everything. Her golden rule duty over drama became the absolute law. Forget comfort, forget sentiment, just duty. That was the ruthless standard used to judge Camilla's status. As for King Charles, exhausted and torn, he was finally persuaded that a temporary hit was needed to save the crown from total disaster. Pushing Camilla out of the center spotlight hurt, sure, but letting the whole monarchy look completely unstable, that would be way worse. But while the palace scrambled to fix things internally, everyone watching on the outside picked up on something way more explosive. When Easter morning hit, the absence was glaring. All the cameras hunted frantically for Camilla's usual spot in the lineup, but the whole visual hierarchy had been completely rewritten. The fans instantly knew something was off within hours. Absolute chaos erupted all over Britain. You and I both saw this coming, right? At first, it was just a tiny ripple. A couple accounts posted photos comparing the setup to older Easter walks. Then the theories multiplied with insane speed. Why did the royal walking order look completely different? Why was Camilla pushed aside? Why were William and Princess Anne suddenly running the entire show? Because in a royal family where every single footstep gets analyzed, one tiny shift becomes a national scandal. And this change was huge. It looked totally deliberate, ice cold and packed with heavy symbolism. The tabloids went crazy, whispering about a secret midnight coup inside the palace operations. Naturally, no one had hard proof, but it was way too clean to be an accident. Palace experts agreed this shakeup was not some last minute scheduling glitch. It looked like the direct result of a ruthless, surgically precise decision. Every single detail pointed to a massive, silent correction of power. Sure, Camilla had not completely vanished from the picture, but she was definitely dragged away from the emotional core of the day, and that tiny demotion alone sparked an absolute wildfire. The fact that the palace refused to explain made it 10 times worse. No PR statement, zero damage control, no senior aide stepped up to soften the harsh narrative. Instead, a suffocating silence dropped over the royal household. What do you and I take away? In this heavy silence, every theory exploded. Some claimed the sudden shift tied directly to Charles's fading health. Others thought it exposed a let's dive in. A huge clash between Camilla's loyal crew and the old school royals. Others whispered that Prince William and Princess Anne finally drew a hard line. Easter had to scream discipline, not just private loyalty. And what made the public backlash so absolutely brutal? That massive emotional contrast. Charles looked completely exhausted, a man crushed by severe illness and toxic internal drama. Meanwhile, William and Anne stood like iron pillars, pure order, total control. The message, whether accidental or totally planned, was devastatingly clear. The crown's future was rapidly shifting toward the royals who put duty way above personal comfort. And in this harsh new hierarchy, Camilla looked incredibly exposed. Palace insiders leaked that she was absolutely shattered by the terrible public optics of this move. For decades, she clawed her way up from hated outsider to Queen Consort, from total scandal to accepted royal fixture, yet in just one single, highly orchestrated Easter appearance. That painfully hard won status suddenly looked incredibly fragile. The humiliation wasn't loud, it was worse. Dead silent, official, unexplained, the exact kind of deep royal damage that leaves zero scars, but ruins everything behind palace doors by nightfall. The wild internet rumors became way too massive for the panicked palace to ignore, yet zero statements dropped. That absolute silence was a brutal message. Now watch closely. The crown wasn't denying this intense drama, just containing it. Behind the quiet humiliation, another question terrified the palace far more than any spicy headline. What happens next? For insiders, this Easter walk was never just a church run, it was a ruthless test of hierarchy, pure endurance, and literal survival during an incredibly chaotic era of dark uncertainty around the king's failing health and the crown's future. Once that order dropped, there was zero going back. Beneath that heavy silence, the palace was reportedly facing a harsh truth they could no longer sugarcoat. The monarchy had entered a highly dangerous transition era. Charles was still the reigning king, still the ultimate boss, still the one guy whose name carried the entire heavy crown. But leaks confirmed his brutal medical treatments and massive public spotlight completely shifted his surrounding vibe. Every choice felt way heavier. Every public step got judged so much harsher. Any hint of weakness risked becoming a massive headline. Here, even a procession could become a literal war zone. For Charles, the nightmare wasn't just personal pain. You see it too. Right, reports say he was absolutely terrified that any public family mess would totally fuel a massive narrative of weakness. The firm had survived grief, wild scandals, divorces, and public rage before. But this moment felt different because it dropped during his reign's absolute most fragile chapter, A king fighting private, severe health battles literally could not afford looking sloppy or confused. And that's exactly why Anne and William stepped up so aggressively. They weren't just family giving sweet advice anymore, they were rising as fierce protectors of the legacy, the ones ready to make ice cold choices while others hesitated. In this harsh new setup, Camilla became extremely vulnerable. Traditionalists reportedly eyed her status with massive anxiety, not because her official title flipped, but because the real world weight of her role stayed fragile. For years, the palace worked endlessly to fix her image and fold her into the core of royal life. But basic acceptance isn't the same as absolute authority. And when dark whisper started, claiming she was getting way too influential over ceremonial matters. Old doubts returned with terrifying speed. The crown forever remembered absolutely everything. Insiders quietly drew brutal comparisons to past royal meltdowns, moments where succession crashed into messy personal feelings. The brutal lesson never changed. System survives only when personal pain is sacrificed for public order. That harsh rule reportedly shaped the brutal Easter decision. It wasn't just about cruelty, it was about legacy. So, what do we learn? Charles loved deeply, sure, but kingship demands pure ice. The crown always comes first. Stick with me. This royal palace drama puts the throne before absolutely everyone. Meanwhile, Kate Middleton's silent power just kept making the future monarchy look unstoppable, her insane self control, and how she easily pulled pure sympathy from people without looking desperate gave traditionalists massive reasons to demand strict discipline. Standing right beside William, she became the face of a clean, calm royal era. Literally the palace's perfect next chapter. So that Easter order, way more than just removing someone, it became a massive symbol of structural change. Pure proof that palace power was quietly bleeding over to the people inheriting the crown next. And as the palace completely scrambled to stop the bleeding, one final wild reveal threatened to expose how insanely serious this crisis had really gotten. Then whispers about secret documents dropped, private memos, updated ceremonial rules, and top secret notes quietly bouncing back and forth between Buckingham Palace and Clarence House. Insiders claim that crazy midnight order wasn't some random emotional impulse at all, it was actually planned weeks in advance. That single detail completely flipped the entire meaning of the Easter move. Think about it if drafted early. Removing Camilla wasn't just some sudden, dramatic, emotional reaction from an exhausted king. It wasn't born from one bad argument, one super awkward meeting, or one final fight behind closed doors. No, this was something much colder. Watch closely here. Reports say ceremonial backup plans were already locked in long before the public ever noticed anything weird. Like certain officials had quietly seen a crisis coming and prepped the whole palace for the exact moment. Private tension couldn't be hidden by polite silence anymore. The craziest claim of all. It involved top constitutional advisors. Word on the inside is trusted legal and ceremonial masterminds were consulted right before the Easter setups changed. They didn't care about gossip, they only cared about credibility. The crown, they basically argued, could not walk into a massive public religious event looking uncertain, divided, or completely hijacked by messy household drama. Top secret briefing papers were reportedly laser focused on top protecting institutional credibility, a phrase that looks super calm on paper, but carried totally brutal weight inside those royal walls. It meant the family could suffer privately, but the literal monarchy could never look weak in public. The king's office, insiders say, then started quietly coordinating the exact message with a tiny circle of elite aides, no public explanations, not a single defensive statement, just cold, controlled silence. Every single move had to look totally natural to avoid a panic. but firm enough to prove Charles was absolutely still the boss. That insanely delicate balance reportedly became the core strategy. The palace couldn't officially confirm the rift, but they absolutely couldn't leave the old ceremonial rules untouched if top figures thought it threatened royal stability. Now I know what you're thinking. Where was Princess Anne? Her influence was becoming impossible to ignore. Her power wasn't flashy, it was pure protocol. She totally understood the quiet, hidden pressure points of the institution: who ran the schedule, who approved where people stood, who briefed staff, who translated tradition when nobody else dared speak the actual truth. Reports say she used those exact pressure points with deadly, icy precision, making sure Easter reflected hard discipline over messy feelings. To her fans, it was absolute protection. But to Camilla's allies, it looked like a silent, brutal protocol coup. Royal historians are literally comparing this to massive succession battles from the past, when questions about image, pure authority, and future leadership turned private drama into massive institutional danger. Charles, insiders claim, was absolutely terrified of looking weak or divided right around the time when the monarchy desperately needed calm strength. And since those Easter changes worked, some insiders started wondering if even more crazy ceremonial changes were already waiting in the shadows. But ultimately, this conflict was never really about a simple Easter procession. It was about who controls the monarchy after Charles. Trust me, you and I know this game isn't over. Let's dive into this wild royal drama. Across Windsor, the monarchy hit a new phase cold, quiet, and ruthless. The public had zero clue. That midnight order, kicking Camilla right out of the procession, not just some simple innocent scheduling tweak. Nope, it was a massive declaration. When pure survival is on the line, Crown picks strict duty over comfort every single time. Tradition crushes emotion. The institution destroys individuals. In the chaotic days right after, that dark message hung over the entire palace. A massive final warning. This whole Easter incident, it became the ultimate symbol of the monarchy violently tightening its iron grip. They snatched real authority back from private hands, giving it directly to the hardcore players who believed discipline equals survival. Palace whispers say King Charles was absolutely torn apart emotionally by the brutal fallout. Honestly, nobody close to him could deny the raw pain behind this insane decision. Camilla had backed him through brutal scandals, harsh critics, and decades of toxic public hate. But holding the crown isn't about being comfortable, it's about brutal sacrifice. Now, watch closely. This is exactly where Charles chooses deep personal heartbreak instead of letting the crown look weak in front of the whole world. Princess Anne walked away from this mess not seeking public glory, but acting as the ultimate silent enforcer. You didn't hear her making loud speeches. Her heavy influence was felt purely through the crushing weight of strict protocol. She literally embodied the old royal blood, the harsh rule that personal wounds stay buried forever. Duty is God, and the giant institution must survive every single emotional storm. Beside her, William looked perfectly locked in as the rock solid future of the throne, the young heir finally realizing that real power isn't always flashy and dramatic. Sometimes it's deadly quiet, sometimes it's just cold, hard procedure, or a single name quietly wiped off a VIP list before dawn. For Camilla, vanishing from the spotlight, heavily exposed massive cracks bleeding behind the scenes. The palace kept their mouths shut, but silence doesn't kill rumors. It only makes them wilder. Across the globe, crazy speculation exploded because no official denial. You and I both know what this looks like. Was this a quick fix or a massive hidden reordering? Was the king just crushing a tiny feud or leveling up the system for an era where William Anne and Kate finally hold the real power? The real answer stayed locked behind heavy palace doors where absolute truth travels in whispers before history finally dares to expose it. And honestly, that is the terrifying reality of the crown. It stays alive through beauty, endless rituals, and loyalty, but also through massive sacrifice and punishing brutal discipline. It can boost a person up to god tier status, then ruthlessly remind them nobody is truly safe whenever the giant institution feels threatened. That whole Easter order might seem like a tiny blip to some, but deep inside the Windsor walls, small changes reveal truly earth shattering truths. Camilla's status dropped, Anne's raw authority leveled up, William's time to rule crept even closer. And Charles, heavily crushed between real love and strict duty, proved a king must sometimes slice down his closest allies just to keep the entire throne safe from falling. Because in this royal family, the absolute biggest wars happen totally off camera. They are brutally finished in dead silence behind heavy doors, long before the world even blinks. So, what do you and I make of this? The crown trusts absolutely no one. Catch you on the next.